Hi, Cameron Goble here, and this is my autoethnography. I've done this kind of assignment before, but I haven't done it quite in this way, and so I'm trying something a little different here. Other times when I've done this assignment for educational classes, I feel like it's come off a little too scripted, and the point here is really to be active in reflecting on my particular situation and how it influences the way that I sort of comport myself as an educator. So I'm going off script on this one, and I'm just going to have to hope that that's okay. So let's talk about autoethnography. The point here is to figure out where I've been and how that influences who I am and my sense of privileges and cultural identity and that sort of thing. So hey, check it out. I've got my family tree here. This is my family tree that my dad put together, and he started putting this together in around 2004, 2005. This particular version came to me around 2006, and you can see it goes back pretty well. So here's me. Here's my dad. Here's my mom. This is my dad's side of the family up here, and this is my mom's side of the family down here. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is that it exists at all. Really. I have the opportunity, as a European-based, white, middle-class kind of guy, to go back and take a look at my family history. So, for example, I can see that here's my dad, and these are where the Gobles sort of spread up from here. Then there's a little branch of the Robinsons who come through here. They tend to be sort of English, Scotty kind of folks. This is the Evans family, where my father's mother came from, and then the Beans are over here. So my mother's side has to do mostly with the Beans, and they're also English type folks who came to the colonies and around the 1700s, right around here, and did their thing. So that's kind of nice. There's me, and here's my mom. So my mom is a Garrett, and you may have heard of the Garretts in New Mexico particularly. Somewhere along that line is a guy named Pat Garrett, who was a sheriff around these parts, and he's famous for having done in Billy the Kid. So he's on here somewhere. The tree isn't that detailed, but he's in there somewhere. And we can follow the Garretts all along here. There's another set called the Wadsworths, and the Robertsons are in here. Not the Robinsons, but the Robertsons. And this goes back about, let's see, there's me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 generations of people who have genetically contributed to me in some way or another. So here is my family tree. Now, what's kind of interesting about this, like I said, is that it exists at all. My dad and my mom got a real hankering for understanding where and who we are. So they did a lot of genealogical research. They put stories together. They put binders together. They did this. All right. So this is one binder that if I were to open it up, you can see lots of pictures of my family in here, and lots of stories. This is the story of the Gobles migrating over in Texas, and pictures and maps of the Old West, and even more detailed family trees. I mean, look at that, right? There you go. This binder is littered with pages just like that. Here's old John Bletcher, and there's Thomas Jonathan Bletcher, and more and more family pictures in here. This is a very rich document, and this is just one binder. I've got more. This one right here is about my granddad, right? So this is my mother's father, Walter. When he died, she put this together as a sort of remembrance for him. There's photoshopped. That's okay. But, he died. He was a Navy man and a cowboy, and he did very well for himself as a sort of figure in the family. So, there he is, slightly younger man. There he is with his dad. Let's see. So, yeah, I've got the story of my grandfather, for example. And in general, there's the Goble family history. So this is specifically about the migration of the Gobles from the eastern shores of this continent all the way to the west. My dad styles himself as a bit of a cowboy and a Navy man, and this helps to tell the story of his side of the family, this whole segment up here. It's important to my dad to have this story in place. And he spent a lot of time researching the sort of historic roots of the Gobles from England and Germany and places like that to tell the story of our family's migration across the West as great frontiers people. There are a couple of troubling issues about this for me. One of them is, I remember my dad, remember this is the Goble family right here, right? This is the Gobles. Goble, 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 Goble. Not Robinsons, not Beans, not any, these are the Gobles. And my dad, as he was piercing back through this line, he eventually ended up with John Jean Goble, who was born in 15th century France. 1536 France. And I remember him telling me that he could have gone back further and further and further, except when he discovered that the Gobles originated in France, he decided to stop. My dad was born in New Mexico here in 1939, so he's a World War II baby. And France has a history that is associated with it, particularly involving World War II. What's interesting is that he got this far back, and when we suddenly discovered that we were French, he stopped. He has the option to do that. I have a very complete family history as a European descended middle class white guy. Having this story behind me is kind of sort of a given almost, and especially for European power structures and dynasties and feudalism and aristocracies, merchant princes, that kind of thing, the sort of thing that was happening in Europe. Your status could be determined by knowing your family's story. Not everybody has that opportunity. And so, not only is it interesting that I have this to draw upon, that I have the familial myth of who we are and where we came from, not only do I have that to begin with, but my father can actually just decide to not have it anymore. If he finds something that is a little distasteful, he can just stop. And he has that option. That's one of the things that white power confers, is the option to not have to play in order to be legitimate and legitimized. So that's a sort of interesting outcome of all of this. That reminds me of this fella. Before he was Lieutenant Commander Geordie LaForge on the Starship Enterprise, or introducing children to a love of literacy, his big TV break, Mr. LeVar Burton, came from a TV show called Roots, which was a 1980s sort of breakout television moment for Black history and the discovery of family in general. See, not everybody has one of these. The only reason that I have a family tree is that somebody bothered to think that my family was important enough to document. And that means that people in this time, and people in this time, and people in this time, and people in this time, people for, nearly 400 years, as far as this goes back, have been writing down and documenting my family's story because it was part of their legitimizing myth. So just having one of these is really kind of weird, but I have it. I want to go to some other topics now. And for that, we're going to get a little more personal. So this is my second or third grade yearbook page. Somebody posted this up to Facebook and linked me right to it. Thanks. Can you find me? Yeah, I'm right there in the center. Not sure really what to say about this other than I see a lot of Christoffersons. I see a Day, a Fredrickson. I see one Garcia and a Garduño. So this is the context of people that I spent my youth with. I'm a native Albuquerquean, but I grew up in the Southeast Heights, and that carries with it a certain amount of privilege and a certain demographic And that was my place, right in there. I did not do very well in school, and that is a whole other topic unto itself. I'm not really going to get into it right here, though I'll probably put up a link to a place where I do eventually. When I got into the University Honors Program, which was not where anyone expected me to land ever, when I got into the Honors Program, one of the senior options for the final year was to create and teach a class. And this is the class of folks that I taught. This is my first experience as what I would call a professional educator. I've been a trainer, and I've helped out in classes and that sort of thing. But until this moment, I was not in charge of a curriculum that was there for students. So this is what I did with my first teaching experience. And it was a wonderful experience. I love these guys a lot. I'm actually in touch with a few of them still, and it's a real privilege. And I think I'm beginning to understand that I mean privilege in a couple of different contexts, because the public school failure that I was before, I don't know what it would have taken me to get back into school if I had not had the opportunities that I had had. And it's difficult to look in retrospect and say this was the result of white privilege, like this, and this, because it all feels so natural at the time, it doesn't make an impact. It's just the way the world works, right? So having to come to those conclusions later on, in retrospect, it's difficult to identify, but I'm starting to see where I ended up. One place that I ended up was being elected to the board of directors at a makerspace called QLab, and these are some of my QLab board of director friends behind me. As a director of the board of QLab, my job is to make the financial decisions and the business decisions that keep the community space viable. So it's a lot of business decisions and policy stuff. For the most part, we're pretty loosey-goosey about it, but there are things that we do have to take into account because we live in the world we live in, and as a nonprofit, that binds us to certain ways of operating. Those ways of operating are determined largely by people who are not us, actually, and so our ability to function is a little tight. It's a bit constrained based on rules that have been imposed upon us. Now, as QLab, we're not a community-changing nonprofit. We're just a place for people to come and meet creative people and do stuff with the tools that we choose to make available. But there are a lot of other nonprofits out there who function under similar constraints and do work directly in the social sphere. And I'm starting to understand how the rules that are made by people who make rules, if that makes sense, start to constrain the social development possibilities of communities, their ability to organize, whether it's in unions or nonprofits or other community-driven collaborative groupings. They are constrained by into particular ways of operating. I'm starting to get an understanding of how that works now that I'm under those myself. But I will say that because of the nature of white privilege, I don't have as hard a time negotiating those rules as other folks do. And in fact, many of the culturally sensitive social nonprofits that I have worked with, they might serve groups like Asians or first-generation immigrants or underprivileged children or foster kids. But a lot of them are generally headed up by white folks like me. This is a picture of my wife and my daughter. My daughter there is literally like a week old. Isn't she cute? We're looking at the transit of Venus across the sun in 2012. And we're holding up these filters so that you can look directly at the sun without going blind. This is an interesting sort of metaphoric image for me. Right behind me is my house. It displays how tying up your future, your middle-class future, in home values does something to interests. It alters perceptions of class, and it alters progressive beliefs, and it ties the owner to a particular capitalist propertied way of getting by for a very long term. So now I own a home. what's that going to do to my privilege? And how's it going to change my perceptions? The idea is to stay aware of it, so that's something I've got my eye on right now. The reason why I thought this was an interesting sort of metaphorical image is because as Paulo Freire, I hope I'm saying that right, tells us, looking at something is the same as choosing a way not to look at something. And so the fact that I'm looking at the sun through a filter in front of my propertied white middle-class home says a little something right there. I'm looking at this picture in a new way.